what was said by the head of Iranian parliament and the chief negotiators of the Iranian delegation. And he said, Muhammad Baqir Ghalibaf, he said the Strait of Hormuz will not be reopened until the oil sanctions have been lifted, frozen assets have been released, and the United States naval blockade has ended, and war has ended on all fronts. And Iran is prepared to inflict an even heavier defeat to the enemy. Here is what he said. And the case of the Strait of Hormuz is still the main problem. Donald Trump yesterday and the day before was talking about it. He's talking about the Strait. He wants to annex the Strait of Hormuz. That's why many people would argue maybe the new round of, you know, war is coming, and it's not done by military experts or political experts. They believe that the United States is preparing itself to attack Iran again. How prepared is Iran today, and what is going on with the case of the Strait? Is it open? Is it closed? Is Iran managing the Strait? Yesterday, we learned one of the UAE oil tankers was hit or was seized uh, close to the Qashim Island. What do we know about that?
In general, very little oil is leaving the Strait of Hormuz. That which passes through goes through with Iran's consent. For the most part, the Iranians are allowing tankers that belong to countries friendly to Iran or countries that have not waged war against Iran to go through. And based on some mini agreements with countries in the region, sometimes they let some oil through alongside the Omani coast, but that fluctuates. The Iranian defensive posture has shifted to offensive defense. In other words, I've read somewhere that Iran's military doctrine has shifted from defensive to offensive. No, that's not the case. Iran's military doctrine is still defensive, but in its defense, it plans to be offensive against the aggressor, meaning the United States, the Israeli regime, and those proxies in the region that have been a part of this war, like the Saudis and the Emiratis, the Kuwaitis, the Bahrainis, the Qataris, and of course the Jordanian regime, all of whom have been deeply involved in the war. Even Oman has been to a lesser degree. And all of them, almost all of them, have actually funded the war because they pay for U.S. expenses in the bases that the United States occupies in their country, which is unique. No, as far as I know, no other country in the world does. In no other part of the world do countries do such a thing. That they pay the United States to have a base, and then they pay for the expenses on the base. And in the case of our war, the expenses were much greater than normal because the United States had brought in so much equipment, and because so many things were going on. So at one point during the war, they had a shortage of cash to hand over to the Americans. That's how expensive the war was for them. So Iran's military posture in reaction to the ongoing U.S. aggression is shifted to offensive, but it's still a defensive doctrine.
Yeah, but when it comes to the speculation about, because yesterday Donald Trump said he's going to bomb Oman, it seems that he's not happy with something. What is that? Because this is the second time he's talking about this.
Well, a while back, we had an agreement with Oman. I mean, the talks had more or less concluded. But then some changes had to be made to the text to finalize, and so that's where things are now. Trump is trying to put pressure on Oman not to do a deal with Iran, but Iran is steadfast. As you pointed out, the chief negotiator, Dr. Ghalibaf, said today that until all the wars are ended in Palestine, in Lebanon, in Yemen, and in Iraq, and until Iranian stolen assets are lifted and the sanctions are removed from Iranian oil exports and the siege is lifted, there will be the Strait of Hormuz will not be open. So that's the final statement, and the United States is going to have to accept that, or the status quo remains, and the global economy, the U.S. economy, will suffer the consequences. So we are where we are. If Oman agrees to the terms that the Iranians find acceptable, then we can move on to the next stage. But under no circumstances will Iran shift its position based on US pressure on Oman. But it just shows how desperate the United States is, and how irrational it is, and how barbaric it is, and how untrustworthy it is, that it would bomb or threaten to bomb friendly countries. And it's not the first time. And another example is, of course, South Korea. Since South Korea did not want to participate in the aggression against Iran, the illegal war of Iran against Iran, like almost all other countries except for U.S. proxies in the region, now they're being punished. So they take away their air defense systems, bring them to protect the Israeli regime, and then they suddenly cut off or end joint military maneuvers, and Trump praises the North Korean government. Of course, the North Koreans are not children. They know that Trump is not someone to be trusted, and that he'll say something quite different tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, based, depending on his mood swing. So on the one hand, he's antagonized people and angered people in South Korea, and there's no doubt that in North Korea they're not going to be naive about Trump and his intentions. I recall during his first term, when Trump met the North Korean leader, afterwards the North Korean foreign minister met Iranian diplomats. Maybe it was in Iran, I don't know. And the Iranians asked him, what was the meeting like? And he said, when Trump was in the room, it was just, nothing. He spoke positively, and as soon as he left the room, his people, who were in charge, the Pompeo and the likes, they were as nasty and as sinister and as aggressive as they'd always been. So they already have their experience with Trump. So it's all Trump does is antagonize everyone. Yesterday, he chose two countries, Oman and South Korea.
Yeah. What do we know about the report on Reuters? It says that Iran is going to do something about the blockade, and it's going to do something militarily. It says that the era of defense is over. Our strategy shifted towards, you mentioned that, towards a full-scale offensive, and we will push the situation to a critical point. And it's all about the blockade and the U.S. blockade. Do you think that as time goes by, let's assume that the United States decides to stay there with the blockade and putting pressure on Iran, how would Iran react in a long run?
Well, first of all, I have to, regardless of what was said, let's put that aside for a minute. Reuters has absolutely no access to senior Iranian officials, and Reuters, especially Reuters Persian, or those who are in charge of the Iran desk or whatever it's called, they have absolutely no access. So whenever they say unnamed senior Iranian officials have told Reuters that, they're lying. And and I have many examples during I've never been in government, but on two occasions on three occasions in Islamabad for a day, but on two occasions I accompanied the negotiators, the Iranian negotiators. One was for the nuclear talks on both occasions, One was when Dr. Zarif was there. I was his media advisor. He wanted to me to be on the team or the spokesperson, and I said I'd prefer just to be a media advisor to help out, but also be independent. Therefore, I can say things more easily, without having any limitations or many limitations. On both, so I have experience with Reuters and the nuclear talks. Reuters on many occasions lied, both in 2015 when Dr. Zarif was negotiating, because as soon as Reuters would say senior Iranian officials, I'd go and ask Dr. Zarif and he'd say nonsense. And then later on when Dr. Bagheri was negotiating during President Raisi's term in office before his martyrdom, my experience was the same. Reuters would come out and say nonsense. I'd go ask Dr. Bagheri and he'd say it's nonsense. So never trust Reuters. And it's not just Reuters, it's the New York Times also. They do that a lot. I mean, the others do it, but these two, I have, very bad memories of them. Remember, the New York Times, I think, quoted like multiple sources that Ayatollah Khamenei, he was on his deathbed and he was dying. This was like a few years ago. And, people would contact me, journalists from abroad, and say, yes, he's now that he's dying, what is Iran going to do? And I say, who says he's dying? And but everyone accepted it because it was the New York Times, and they said multiple sources. And then literally a couple of days later, he was walking and talking to people in his near his office, and he was speaking with people. So it just shows how how little access they have, how little intelligence they have, and how often they lie. And now what they often do, and this is something that I've experienced just over the past few days. They go and they quote sources, senior officials, but it's since you know these things, it comes out in Persian media, in Iranian media, and then they go and take that and say a senior Iranian official said so and so. In other words, they just take, since it's written in Persian for the most part, they take it out of the Iranian media, and then they just say senior Iranian officials told us. So people should not use these sources, or they should not trust these sources. But with regards to Iran's position, as I said earlier, Iran's military posture is defensive. That has not changed. Its military doctrine, I should say, is defensive. But it is going to be offensive against the aggressor. In other words, the United States and those who carry out attacks on Iran, those who carry out siege warfare against Iran is going to be offensive when protecting itself now. So there is a significant change in that respect. Now, how this plays out, I don't know, but I think that the Iranians are going to be more tough in many ways, whether it's with regards to the Strait of Hormuz or with regards to other policies. I think we're going to clearly see that, because Major General Mohsen Rezai, the new chair of the Supreme National Security Council, his public statements are clear. And it's obvious that he was chosen both because he's a man of influence. He's had very senior positions throughout the years. He's an effective manager. He's the person who basically turned the Revolutionary Guards into what it is. It was a very small organization with a few light weapons when the war started, and then he turned it into the powerful force that it is, that fights alongside the regular army. So he's a very effective manager, very influential, and his views are clear for everyone to see. So Iran's position is going to be different than before. Its posture is going to be different than before. And I think in the Western media, at least from what I've seen, they have taken note of that.
What's going on with the case of MOU, the 60 days that was supposed to the United States and Iran coming to some sort of agreement or doing something to get to the next step? That didn't happen. And we had the spokesman of the Iranian, the foreign ministry of Iran coming out and saying it doesn't mean there was no mention of the deadline for that MOU, which means that it can be extended and depends on the two sides if the talks happen. What do we know about that, the position on the part of Iranians about the MOU?
Well, the MOU is right now effectively dead. But the Iranians have said that if we're ever going to come to normalization in the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz, all those commitments in the MOU have to be carried out. So the United States is not going to be able to have a normalization in the Strait by a deal, some new deal where they do less than what they were supposed to do. And the Iranians have been clear in their interpretation of the MOU. Now, some say the recent statements by Iran go beyond the MOU. I don't see it that way. It is the MOU. But the Iranians have said all of Iran's assets have to be handed over instead of like half of it at the beginning and the other half later on. But more importantly, all the wars across the region have to end. It is an MOU, and I've said this from the beginning. You recall, I said that when Iran said Lebanon in Article 1, it also said on all fronts. The reason why Lebanon was named and Gaza was not named or Yemen was not named was because a war was raging in Lebanon. And so that was that was stated specifically to stress on what was going on in Lebanon. But it didn't just say Lebanon, it said Lebanon and all other fronts. That means that Lebanon is not the only place. But now the Iranians have said very clearly that those other fronts are Palestine, Yemen, and Iraq. So the United States is going to have to fulfill its obligations. Otherwise, there will be no normalization. Come what may, the Iranians will make sure that the Strait of Hormuz is not open until the genocide in Gaza ends, until the occupation in Lebanon ends, until the killing of Yemeni civilians ends, and until the United States war and aggression in Iraq comes to an end, there will be no normalization.
We had an attack on Iraqi Kurdistan. The office of Mansour Barzani was attacked, and it was drones. They used drones to hit the target, and they said it was Iranian. Later on, we learned from the Iranian foreign minister said we didn't do that, and he said that actually Iran helped them to defend themselves and not attacking them. Who's manipulating the situation in Iraq? If that's the case, the question would be, who's doing this?
Well, you recall a while back, the Iraqi government said they arrested people linked to Ukraine who were firing drones at all sorts of different entities, basically to create confusion and division and anger and hostility. So this could have been something linked to the same project. But it's clear as day that Iran would not carry out such an operation. First of all, Iran always declares its operation. Second of all, Iran didn't do this to Qatar, and it didn't do it to Saudi Arabia or the Emirates or Bahrain or Kuwait, even though they were very much a part of the war against Iran. They were co-conspirators. They were waging war against Iran, but Iran never bombed the palaces of these dictatorships, these dictators, these family rulers were never under threat by Iran. So it's obvious that Iran had nothing to do with this. But definitely someone who wants to stir up trouble inside Iraq or between the local government in northern Iraq and Iran, that they carried this out to create tensions. There's no incentive for Iran to do such a thing. I mean, Iran is striking the terrorist groups in northern Iraq and it will continue to do so. But there's no incentive for Iran to fire drones at these two offices.